How have each of you changed the character of Kratos? How do you think his arc has grown over the games?
I mean, I think maybe it's a little bit to our detriment, perhaps. We haven't evolved his arc to change him as a person. I mean, he still kind of just shouts at the gods and says Ares and Athena a lot, which is great. He's an ornery character, but there are layers beneath that I think we could have explored. I know for myself, I feel like there was a lot of balls I dropped because I tried maybe to go a little bit wider. I wanted to really have Kratos' impact be felt throughout all of the world. That's, I think, is an exciting aspect about Ghost of Sparta, is that it really gets down to Kratos' heart, more of a personal story, rather than maybe the overreaching grand epic that I was trying to go for.
It's easy to forget that the God of War series began with a quiet, solemn moment of despair. Standing atop a mountain, Kratos laments being abandoned by the gods, and, unable to find hope, he forfeits his life to end his suffering. Like many characters from Greek mythology, Kratos began life as a tragic figure. Manipulated by deceitful gods into killing his own family, then promised respite from the torment, only to be denied it. It was an impactful moment of emotional vulnerability for God of War's protagonist, but it was a rare one. At its core, God of War games were about fulfilling a power fantasy, by empowering players to carve a bloody path through the pantheon of Greek deities. The opportunity for heartfelt moments of emotion were few and far in between. But for Cory Barlog, writer of multiple God of War titles and director of God of War 2, Kratos' redemption is in those small sparks of humanity. After a few years away from the series, Barlog rejoined developer Sony Santa Monica in 2013 and began work on a reboot of the series. Returning to the character he helped define, he set himself his very own Herculean labor: to humanize Kratos.
This franchise is a huge part of who I am. I didn't want it to end the way that it ended. I had always saw it going into another place. I had kind of said like, I really feel like I have another one in me, and when I kind of went on that walkabout, the first thing I did was write the God of War Ghost of Sparta script. And then when I finished that one, I said, well, that wasn't the one more I have in me. Like, I loved that script, but I was like, I have another one that's just like going out there and just doing something crazy, but I just don't know.
That something crazy, as we now know, was to relocate Kratos and the franchise to the realm of the Norse gods, which may feel like an obvious next step for the series. According to Barlog, however, the decision to shift to Norse mythology served to expose facets of Kratos' character that were lost underneath all the blood and sinew of the previous games.
I didn't really want to go and reboot to Greek mythology. I wanted to explore something else. I think giving him a new setting, a fresh start was important. Yeah, changing Kratos, or at least exposing a different side to him, making him more dimensional, kind of the uncovering, the archaeological uncovering of his humanity, to discover there is a human buried way deep inside, right? A human that was beat down, right? Not only, I think, by the horrible things that happened in his family life, but how he was trained.
In the new God of War, Kratos is very much outside of his comfort zone. Not just because he's in the realm of Thor, Loki and Odin, disconnected from its culture, history and traditions, but also because he's now a single father. His son, Atreus, represents something that both Kratos and the God of War series have neglected to explore: responsibility. For Barlog and the team, the key to humanizing Kratos, a larger-than-life anti-hero, lies in this father and son dynamic. Atreus is unaware of his father's history, but eager to prove himself, and seeing flashes of the same red-hot temperament, Kratos knows that Atreus is at risk of repeating the sins of the father. To serve as a guiding hand for his son, Kratos needs to soften, something which is entirely in opposition of his nature. At the same time, Atreus is more connected to the world around him, having been born and raised there. For Kratos, this means having the humility to allow his son to guide him.
He is this way to get Kratos to open up a little bit more, but also this sense of like, he actually has just as much to teach as Kratos does. In some ways, more, right? He's seeing the world as a human. He doesn't understand gods, right? He understands what it was to be a human. That's how he was raised. And he's able to help Kratos see that, to pull a little bit of that out of him, so that this little kid is teaching his demigod dad what it is to be a human. Well, his dad is actually trying to teach him how not to make the mistakes that he made.
Now, you are ready.
This dependency is similar to the relationship between Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us. Despite ostensibly being a game about surviving the post-apocalypse, The Last of Us focuses on the relationship between a cynical father figure and the young, innocent girl he takes responsibility for. Like Joel, Kratos is hardened and embittered, closed off to the world and people around him. Their wards, however, become the vectors used to expose nuance in their characters and help them rediscover their own humanity.
There's a moment at the beginning of the game that was in the E3 demo where Atreus shoots the arrow before Kratos expects him to, and he starts to yell at him, and then he pauses. He takes a breath, and then he calmly, but still with a bite, finishes his thought.
Only fire! Only fire when I tell you to fire.
That was a big realization moment for us. That was the aha writing moment where we realized, like, look, he isn't always going to be yelling, because always yelling isn't going to accomplish something. But he's also not really going to be able to know how to properly emote or be vulnerable or relate to his son. So he's not going to say a lot, right? And we really poke fun at that too. We let Atreus have fun with the fact that he doesn't talk, he doesn't like people, right? And I think that lends itself to this feeling of like, there are some of the most human moments when Kratos is somewhat quiet.
I'm sorry.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
While the new God of War is making a more meaningful attempt at humanizing Kratos, this isn't the first time Barlog and his team have attempted to do this. Although PSP title God of War Chains of Olympus was primarily still a story about vengeance, it also reunited Kratos with his daughter, Calliope. After relinquishing his weapons and the powers he had accumulated, Kratos was granted access into Elysium by Persephone, queen of the underworld. There he embraced his daughter, promising never to leave her again. But in a cruel twist, Persephone revealed that she had unleashed Kronos the Titan to destroy the world, including Elysium. In order to stop him and save Calliope, Kratos would once again need to become the monstrous ghost of Sparta, breaking the promise to his daughter. However, the gravitas of this moment was undercut by a QuickTime event in which players hammered a button to push Calliope away from him as she pleaded for him to stay and desperately clung to his legs. It was another instance of vulnerability for Kratos, but one that was met with a mixture of ambivalence and mockery. Kratos had established himself as the archetypal brute, and the sudden pivot to loving father forced to sacrifice his own happiness for the sake of others was criticized for being at best jarring and at worst an empty attempt at trying to present him as sympathetic. Going into the new God of War, Barlog is mindful of the response to that moment with Calliope, and how the new God of War can avoid making those mistakes again.
It bummed me out, the response to that one, but it taught me a really good lesson, right? You have to earn the moment, right? And perhaps we didn't do a good job of earning that moment. It doesn't feel natural if Kratos just suddenly is who Kratos is at the end of the game, right at the beginning of the game. You're like, oh, that's abrupt. You want to feel like you have gone on the journey. I learned from those things and say, all right, I need to look at this. There's the moment at the end where Kratos is, spoilers, carrying his brother's body up the stairs, right? And all of these moments really kind of go back to Kratos sacrificing his health, spoilers, in the end of God of War 1 to his wife and child, right? These were emotional moments that we were trying to capture within gameplay, and we're kind of like always looking, going, where's our hugging the wife and child moment, right? Where is that? And it's sometimes successful, sometimes not. These are definitely difficult moments to land. If you work hard to earn them over time, they land very well. If they feel shoved in or if they feel rushed, they do not work so well.
Earning the moment in the new God of War means changing things that fans of the series have come to expect. And based on the few hours that we've played, it seems developer Sony Santa Monica is more than willing to do that. What stood out in our play session was how subdued the opening felt compared to previous titles. Like the first game, the new God of War opens on a quiet moment, with Kratos chopping down a tree that holds significance to his wife, and represents taking on the responsibility of raising their son properly. But unlike the first game, which quickly moved into a battle with a Hydra on a ship amidst a raging storm, it doesn't immediately escalate into a bombastic set piece. It gives that moment space to breathe, the time you need to think about what it meant to Kratos, and how it will impact him going forward. Although there was still plenty of brutal action and an epic boss fight that unleashed the monster constantly scratching at the surface of Kratos' psyche, it was the smaller moments that had the most impact. In these moments, you could really feel Kratos trying to reconcile who he used to be with who he wants to be. And this is a struggle that Barlog and his team are also facing.
I would say, you know, the early games we had that chip on our shoulders of like, we're gonna make a great action game even though you say we can't. It did fuel me a little bit that when we announced it, a lot of people had that resistance to it, saying like, why did they do this? They should have done a new character, or Kratos is just one-dimensional, right? It's the same people who say he's only one-dimensional, and then you change him and, oh, that's terrible, why would you do that? I think what's interesting is we just showed that one part. I always use the comparison of saying he's got this monster inside of him. And that monster was free to run around at all times, and now he has to figure out how to control it, right? And let that monster out at set times and be a little bit more in control of it. And I think that struggle, the fact that he will fail constantly at that, is the interesting aspect of it. I hope that at the end of this, we do have people playing the game and saying, I didn't expect for him to be a character that had dimension, but he is, right? That is fantastic. I think as a writer, as a director, that is a challenge that I love, right? Because it is hard to create a brand new character. I believe it is harder to take a character that everybody thinks they know and understand and show them a side of that character that feels sincere, that feels earnest, that feels right, that is very different, that challenges their sort of preconceived notions. That's difficult. And if you succeed, I hope that we have. I think that'll be a proud moment for me. I think that's a proud moment for the team.
So there you have it. It was really interesting chatting to Cory about their new take on Kratos. I'm not gonna lie, I was one of those people who, despite loving the series, thought, can you really make this character interesting? And I was surprised with how I came away from my short experiences with the game. It seems like they know what they're doing. I'm interested to see whether it carries on throughout the game, but I have confidence in it now and I didn't have it before, so that's exciting. In the meantime, if you want something a little more deeper, looking at the combat and looking at what's changed since the last few games, you can find an analysis video of all the new mechanics and the setup for the game itself on GameSpot.com, as well as youtube.com/GameSpot. While you're there, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to let me know what you think about the old God of War or the new God of War, you can let me know in the comments or find me on Twitter @TamorH. Say hello, let's talk about God of War. I love it, you love it, let's do it. See you next time.